On September 1st, 1983, a Soviet fighter pilot named Gennadiy Osipovich looked through his cockpit canopy at the aircraft in front of him and saw 2 rows of windows. He knew it was a Boeing. He knew it was a civilian plane. He did not tell his ground controllers. They did not ask. He fired 2 missiles. All 269 people on board Korean Airlines Flight 007 were killed, 246 passengers and 23 crew, including 22 children under the age of 12 and a United States congressman. 13 years later, in 1996, Osipovich gave an interview to the New York Times. He said, "I saw 2 rows of windows and knew that this was a Boeing. I knew this was a civilian plane. But for me, this meant nothing. It is easy to turn a civilian-type plane into one for military use. I did not tell the ground that it was a Boeing-type plane. They did not ask me." He said this without apparent remorse. He was describing what happened as a professional assessment, the specific calculation of a military pilot who had been told to shoot and who shot. The question of whether 269 people had to die for that calculation has never been adequately answered by anyone involved. This is the story of Korean Airlines Flight 007, the Boeing 747 that strayed into Soviet airspace on September 1st, 1983, was tracked by Soviet radar for hours, was intercepted by Soviet fighters who could see its navigation lights and its passenger windows, and was shot down on the order of a ground controller who either did not know or did not care that it was a civilian airliner carrying 269 people. It is also the story of what happened after the plane went down, how Ronald Reagan used the incident as a weapon in the Cold War's most dangerous year, how the Soviet government lied about what had happened, and how the specific sequence of events between September 1st and November 1983, the downing of Cal 007, followed 6 weeks later by NATO's Able Archer exercise, brought the world closer to nuclear war than it had been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Korean Airlines Flight 07 departed John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York shortly before midnight on August 30th, 1983. It was a scheduled commercial flight to Seoul, South Korea, with a refueling stop in Anchorage, Alaska. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-230B, 11.5 years old, powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney engines. The passenger manifest included business travelers, families, students, children, and Larry McDonald, a United States congressman from Georgia who was traveling to Seoul for a ceremony marking the 30th anniversary of the U.S.-South Korea Mutual Defense Treaty. The flight departed Anchorage at approximately 4:00 a.m. local time on August 31st. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft began to deviate from its planned course. The deviation was small at first. The plane crossed the first navigational waypoint roughly 60 nautical miles off course. By the second waypoint, the deviation had grown to 100 miles. By the third, it was 160 miles off course. The aircraft was flying in a straight line, but the line was not the line it was supposed to be on. The most widely accepted explanation for the deviation is pilot error related to the aircraft's inertial navigation system. The crew had either failed to properly engage the system or had entered incorrect waypoint data. The autopilot was following a magnetic heading rather than the programmed route. The crew, flying at night over open ocean with no visual references, apparently did not notice the accumulating deviation. The cockpit voice recorder, which was recovered by Soviet forces but concealed from international investigators until 1992, confirmed that the crew was unaware of their position. The aircraft entered Soviet airspace over the Kamchatka Peninsula at approximately 3:51 a.m. local time. The specific context of Soviet airspace in September 1983 is essential to understanding what happened next. The Cold War was at its most dangerous point in 20 years. The Reagan administration had launched the Strategic Defense Initiative. NATO had deployed Pershing II missiles in Western Europe, placing nuclear weapons within 6 to 10 minutes striking distance of Moscow. In March and April 1983, the United States had conducted Fleet X-83, the largest naval exercise ever held in the North Pacific, during which American aircraft had repeatedly overflown Soviet military installations in the Kuril Islands, an operation that had resulted in the disciplining of Soviet officers who had been unable to intercept them. The Soviet military leadership was, by the fall of 1983, deeply suspicious of American intentions and actively fearful that Reagan was planning a preemptive nuclear strike. Yuri Andropov, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, had initiated Operation Ryan, a massive intelligence-gathering program designed to detect the early signs of a nuclear first strike that he believed Reagan was preparing. And on the specific night that Kal-07 entered Soviet airspace, the Soviet military was monitoring a scheduled missile test at the Kura Missile Test Range on Kamchatka. The airspace was on heightened alert. Every radar station was active. The systems designed to detect American intrusion were fully operational. KAEL-007 appeared on Soviet radar screens and was immediately classified as an unidentified aircraft on a trajectory that crossed directly over the most sensitive military installations on the Kamchatka Peninsula. Soviet interceptors were scrambled from Kamchatka. They failed to reach the aircraft before it crossed back over international waters between Kamchatka and Sakhalin Island. This failure, the inability to intercept an unidentified aircraft over their most sensitive military territory, was itself a source of intense institutional anxiety. Soviet officers who failed to intercept aircraft over restricted territory faced severe professional consequences. The failure over Fleet X-83 earlier that year was fresh in institutional memory. As KAL-07 approached Sakhalin Island, also restricted Soviet airspace, home to additional military installations, a second set of interceptors was scrambled. Major Gennadiy Osipovich, flying a Sukhoi Su-15 fighter, made visual contact with the aircraft. He could see its navigation lights. He reported seeing them to ground control on 3 occasions. Navigation lights are a feature of civilian aircraft. Military aircraft operating on covert missions do not use navigation lights. Osipovich was ordered to attempt to force the aircraft to land. He flew alongside it. He fired what the Soviet government later claimed were warning shots using cannon rounds, though the interceptor's gun was not loaded with tracer rounds, meaning the warning shots, if they occurred, would have been invisible to the 747's crew in the darkness. The 747 did not respond. It continued on its heading. At approximately the same time, KAL-007's crew received routine instructions from Tokyo Air Traffic Control to climb from flight level 330 to flight level 350, a normal altitude change. The crew complied, the aircraft climbed. Soviet ground controllers, observing the altitude change on radar, interpreted it as an evasive maneuver, the aircraft attempting to escape the interceptor. The interpretation was wrong. The climb was a routine response to a routine instruction from a civilian air traffic control authority that had no idea the aircraft was in Soviet airspace. But the Soviet ground controllers did not know about the Tokyo instruction. They saw an unidentified aircraft over restricted territory that was now changing altitude in what appeared to be an attempt to escape. The order to fire was given. Osipovich fired 2 K-8 air-to-air missiles. At least one struck the aircraft, causing massive structural damage. KAL-007 did not explode immediately. It continued flying for approximately 12 miles, losing altitude in a slow spiral before crashing into the Sea of Japan west of Sakhalin Island. The descent lasted several minutes. Whether any passengers were conscious during those minutes is not known and probably cannot be known. All 269 people on board were killed. The Soviet government's initial response was silence, followed by denial, followed by partial acknowledgement, followed by defiance. For 3 days, Moscow said nothing. When pressed, TASS, The official Soviet news agency stated only that an unidentified aircraft had entered Soviet airspace and had been warned but continued its incursion. No mention of destruction, no mention of casualties. The United States government responded with fury. Secretary of State George Shultz held a press conference within hours of confirmation that the aircraft had been shot down. President Reagan called the incident a massacre and a crime against humanity that must never be forgotten. He described it as an act of barbarism. The Reagan administration had been characterizing the Soviet Union as an evil empire for months. KAL 007 provided the most visceral justification for that characterization. The United States had independent confirmation of what had happened. An American listening post in northern Japan had been monitoring Soviet military communications and had recorded the conversation between Osipovich and his ground controllers in real time. The tape was played at the United Nations Security Council by Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick. The recording established that the interceptor pilot had the airliner in sight for more than 20 minutes before firing, that he had seen the navigation lights and reported them, and that he had made no apparent attempt to communicate with the aircraft or signal it to land in accordance with international practice. The Soviet government, confronted with this evidence, changed its story. It acknowledged destroying the aircraft, but claimed it had been on a spy mission for the United States. No evidence was presented to support this assertion. The Soviets maintained this position for years. The black box, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, was recovered by Soviet naval forces in October 1983. The Soviet government concealed this fact from the International Civil Aviation Organization investigation and from the world. The existence of the recovered recorders was not acknowledged until 1992, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, when Russia released the tapes to ICAO. The tapes confirmed that the crew had been unaware of their position and had not been conducting an intelligence mission. 25 days after KAL 007 was shot down on September 26, 1983, Stanislav Petrov sat at a console in a Soviet early warning facility and decided that the computer report of an American nuclear missile launch was a false alarm. He was right. The false alarm was caused by an optical illusion produced by sunlight reflecting off clouds. But the Soviet military system in September 1983 was geared to expect a first strike and to retaliate immediately. The psychological environment in which Petrov made his decision, the environment in which a false alarm felt plausible enough to require a human decision to override it, was directly shaped by the tensions that KAL 07 had escalated 3 weeks earlier. 6 weeks after the downing of KAL 07, NATO conducted Able Archer 83, a nuclear command exercise that the Soviet leadership interpreted as possible preparation for an actual first strike. The Ryan intelligence gathering program, already active before KAL 07, was expanded. The Soviet military moved to elevated alert status. The world came closer to nuclear war in November 1983 than at any time since October 1962. The sequence is direct. KAL 007 on September 1st. Petrov's false alarm on September 26th. Able Archer in November. 3 events in 3 months, each escalating the tension that the previous one had created. If you have seen our episodes on Petrov and on Able Archer, you have seen the consequences. The downing of KAL 007 was the event that set the sequence in motion. One of the consequences of KAL 07 that Reagan did not anticipate, and that has received less attention than the geopolitical consequences, was his decision to make the global positioning system freely available for civilian use. The GPS satellite network had been developed by the American military for its own navigation purposes. After KAL 007, Reagan issued a directive making GPS available to civilian aviation worldwide, once the system was sufficiently developed as a common good. The specific technology that allows every person with a smartphone to know their exact location on Earth was made freely available because a Korean airliner strayed off course in 1983 and 269 people died for it. The families of the passengers and crew received no remains. The aircraft crashed into deep water. Soviet naval forces conducted recovery operations, but did not share what they found with the families or with international investigators. Some personal effects were recovered and returned years later after the Soviet Union dissolved. Most were not. Gennadiy Osipovich, the pilot who fired the missiles, continued his career in the Soviet Air Force. In his 1996 interview, he expressed no regret. He described the shootdown as a professional duty executed under orders. He died in 2015 at the age of 77. Larry McDonald, the United States congressman on board, was 48 years old. He was the chairman of the John Birch Society and one of the most conservative members of Congress. His death on a Soviet missile over the Sea of Japan became, briefly, a political cause célèbre for the American right. His family was never given a satisfactory explanation for why a civilian airliner was shot down over Sakhalin when the interceptor pilot could see its passenger windows and its navigation lights. Nobody has ever been given that explanation. The most honest answer available is the one Osipovich himself provided. "I knew this was a civilian plane, but for me, this meant nothing. They did not ask me." Thank you for being here for this story. Korean Airlines Flight 007 is one of the most significant events of the Cold War's most dangerous year. 269 people died because a navigation system failed, a pilot did not notice, and a military system that had been designed to shoot first and identify later did exactly what it was designed to do. The pilot who fired the missiles could see the passenger windows. He fired anyway. The ground controllers who gave the order did not ask whether the aircraft was civilian. They did not want to know. If you haven't seen the Hansen episode yet, that story is already on the channel. It covers the FBI agent who sold American nuclear war plans to the same Soviet system that shot down KAL 007. The system that was, in September 1983, already convinced that an American first strike was imminent. Both episodes are about what happens when institutions designed for one purpose, defense, produce the opposite result. The Soviet air defense system was built to protect the country. It killed 269 civilians. The FBI was built to protect American secrets. Its own agents sold them. The Cold War was full of systems that did the opposite of what they were designed to do. Subscribe to OKO, War Declassified, new episode every week.